Well, we've been going through the Old Testament, kind of skimming. We've stalled out here at God's preparation of the nation of Israel to enter the land of Canaan. And that preparation begins officially with his announcing his law that we know as the Ten Commandments from the top of Mount Sinai in that great big booming voice. This week we come to the fifth of those commandments that starts the section of the Ten Commandments that pertains to how we relate to one another, how we love our neighbor as ourself. And in chapter 20, verse number 12, God says, "You will honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God is giving you." Kind of a short commandment. Honor your parents. The requirement is very simple. One word. Honor. Well, what does it mean to honor? Well, it depends. The outworking of the command to honor your father and your mother takes different forms in different phases of our lives. In phase number one, when we are children, the way that we honor our father and our mother is, first of all, we obey. We obey. And why do we obey? Because they are the authority in our lives. And this is what Paul does to give us some perspective on authority in our lives. Not just our parents, but our husbands, if you're a wife, our teachers, if you are a student, our mayor, our governor, our president, etc. He says in Romans chapter 13, every person must be subject to the superior authorities. Whatever authorities that God has placed in your life, you must be subject. What's that mean? It means to be obedient. You do what they tell you. But I don't like it. Well, sorry, did I forget to address that issue? Be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. I listened to a preacher who is a family member imply in a sermon not too long ago that evil emperors and presidents, etc., were not appointed by God. They were appointed by men. But this says there is no authority except from God. And those that exist, that means if they are in a position of authority, have been instituted by God. Therefore, he who resists the authorities, your parents, your husband, your governor, your teacher, etc., resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. Government, yeah. God keep us from government. Okay. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of him who is in authority? Then do what is right, and you will receive his approval. Why? Because he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, you better be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is the servant of God to execute wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be subject, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. So why do we obey our parents? It's because they are God-appointed authorities in our lives during phase one when we are children. And we parents teach our children to obey us in a way that teaches them how to obey God and what God expects of us. Let me see if I can clarify that with an example. I know a man who says to his 5-year-old, pick up your toys, all over the living room. Big fight. I don't want to pick up my toys. And this goes on, but I told you to pick up your toys. I want you to pick up your toys now. We're about to eat dinner. And this discussion goes on for who knows how long. And then, first of all, there's no consequences. And then he says, well, just pick up the toys that are on the couch. Okay. What is he teaching the child about obeying God? That if you argue with God long enough, he's going to reduce his requirement of you? Is that how we want to rear our children? Is that the idea we want them to get about obeying God? The way we train them to obey us as parents and grandparents is giving them an idea of what God is expecting as far as obedience goes. So when we teach them to obey, we teach them, first of all, the reason for obedience. And for those of you out in Facebook land, you may as well just go ahead and shut me off right now, because I'm just going to make you mad. We teach them the reason for obedience. And what's the first reason for obedience? Because it's right. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, children in the Lord, obey your parents, for this is right. Okay? Do you reason with your children? Well, I can remember a man talking with, again, another 5-year-old, his little boy. Why do I have to go to bed, Daddy? Well, because it's 8 o'clock. Why do I have to go to bed at 8 o'clock? Well, because you're young and you need, you need your sleep. How come you don't go to bed at 8 o'clock? Well, I'm adult. I don't need as much sleep as you do. Well, why not? You work harder than I do. And he's reasoning with his child. Why do we obey our parents? Because this is right. Our parents are not obligated. They have the option of giving you a reason, but they are not obligated to give you a reason. So in other words, you do it because I said so is a valid thing to say to your child. Now, I'm not picking on you kids in here. I'm preparing you to bring up children of your own someday in the Lord. Because God is not obliged to give us an explanation as to why he told us to do something. Because of our sin nature, most of the time, we're going to find a problem with something that God has told us to do. But let me tell you this. If God says to do it, it is the right thing to do. But God, this is going to cost me. This is going to cost me this relationship. It's going to cost me these riches. It's going to, yeah. But it is the right thing to do. So we teach our children that to obey is the right thing to do. Why do we obey God? Because it's right. We teach them the reason for obedience, because it's right. Not only that, we teach them the reason for obedience is fear. Whoa, fear. Yeah. I mean, how many of you older people in this room have not heard the voice coming from the bottom of the stairs? If you kids don't settle down up there and go to sleep, I'm coming up. And a few minutes later, you hear the drawing of the 9-foot, 80-pound belt through the denim loops of Daddy's pants as he walks very slowly up the stairs. Is there not fear in your heart? Oh, yeah. Do you know your daddy loves you? Yeah, and you love your daddy, but there is also fear. And why do we obey our parents? Because we fear. Kids obey because they fear their parents. Well, I don't want my child to be afraid of me. I swear, if I hear that one more time from somebody, I'm going to, as gently as I can, in Jesus' name, break their thumbs. I don't want my child to fear me. Did you ever stop to ask yourself, what does God want? Let me tell you what God wants. I'm reading from Leviticus chapter 9, verse number 3. Every one of you shall fear his mother and his father. What does God want? He wants you to fear your mother and your father. Now, some of the modern translations, not all of them, will translate that, I want you to reverence your mother and your father. Let me tell you what this word, this Hebrew word means and how it was first used in the Old Testament. You remember in Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve have just eaten themselves out of house and home. And they are hiding. And Adam says to God's question, Adam, where are you? He says, I heard the sound of you walking in the garden, and I feared, and I hid myself. Was Adam reverencing God? No, he was afraid. It's the same Hebrew word used right here where God says, every one of you shall fear his mother and his father. But kids don't fear parents anymore. I can remember teaching a girl that I dated for the longest time who never disciplined her sons, and her friends used to tell her, you can come to my house, but you cannot bring your children because they were undisciplined and disrespectful and disobedient, and she did not have a handle on it, so I taught her how to discipline her children. Well, one day, because of, you know what they teach you in school, her 10-year-old comes home and says to her, if you spank me, I'm just going to call DHR. And my girlfriend got very scared. And so I looked her in the eye and I said, do you fear God? Well, she knew the right answer, so she said, yes. I said, do you fear God more than you fear the government? Do you fear God more than you fear your child or losing your child? And she had a decision to make. And she whooped his tail. Okay? So, the 6-year-old, he picks up on things. He's probably the most intelligent of the three. The next morning, she's bringing him to school, and he's mouthing off to her in the back seat. She pulls the car quickly over to the side of the road, reaches back and swats him on the thigh a couple times. And a car pulls up next to her, and a lady in the driver's seat is going like this at her. So she gets home and she calls me up. She's in tears. She goes, I just know that lady's going to call DHR, and DHR is going to come to my house and take away my children. Okay. I had to review with her constantly. Folks, this is how you encourage people. You review the basic scriptural concepts. Do you fear God or do you fear the government? And are you being conditioned to fear your children? They should fear you. So sure enough, within a couple of days, she gets a call from DHR. And this is the best thing that could have happened to this woman. DHR comes to the house and sits her and her 6-year-old down in the living room and starts asking the questions. And they're asking the kid, did your mother hit you in the car the other day? Yes, ma'am. Where did she hit you? Right here on my leg. Can you still walk okay? Yes, ma'am. Why did she hit you? As only a 6-year-old Southern boy could say, because I was being ugly to her. And she says, thank you for answering my questions. And she told the little boy she just wanted to talk to her mother. And she said to my girlfriend, stuff like this happens all the time. Don't you worry about it. The courts are on your side. You can discipline your child. Mothers need to be encouraged, folks. And I have watched women address tantrum-throwing children in the grocery store with a spanking. And I will, in an intimidating way, walk up to these women and say, I've got something to say to you. And they stand there in fear. And then I say, I want to thank you for loving your child enough to do what you just did. And they think for a second, and all of a sudden they smile They need the encouragement. And then I look down at the kid, and he's got a frown on his face now because he thought somebody was coming to rescue him. Guys, we do obey our parents because we fear them. God does not want kids to live in terror of their parents, because there are parents out there that do some awful things to children in the name of discipline. But if your kids do not fear you on at least some level, then you are doing something wrong, and let me tell you what you're going to get. Bobby McDougall lived across the street from me in Philmont, New York. Bobby was a year older than I, but he was a little bit smaller than I. And Bobby had no fear of his parents. And his mother was yelling at him in the house, and I could hear her. And he was yelling back at her, and he was still alive. And he bursts out the front door, and I'm watching this, and she comes out after him on the porch, and his father is sitting there on the porch. And his father gets up and says, "Bobby, you need to do what your mother said." And Bobby pushed him back down in his chair and just walked off the property and did what he wanted to do. Why do we obey God? Because we fear him. When God showed up to rescue Israel out of the land of Egypt, what's the first thing that he wanted them to know? I am a powerful God. Which gives the implication, when I tell you to do something, you ought to do it because I've got the power to do something about it. And when we teach kids to fear us, at least on some level, we are teaching them to fear the Lord our God. Because as the writer of Hebrews tells us in chapter 10, verse 31, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. So, at this phase of our life, we are teaching our children to obey, and we teach them to obey because they love us. Isn't this the one that we all long for, to say, my kids obey me because they love me and they delight in me and they want to please me? A young lady who lives down in Wilsonville, I have watched her grow over the last 3 or 4 years, and she's getting there, folks. She really is. And she has decided to take on homeschooling because of all this pandemic stuff. And she says yesterday, and she's also trying to do a haircutting business. And she says, yesterday I came home and did some letter activities with Autumn and Aubrey, and told her to come sit with me, and I was going to do some of hers. And she says, I'll be right there. And the next thing she knows is she wakes up. She says, I woke up and I realized my kids, and we're talking very young kids now, kindergarten, first grade age, my kids had covered me up and turned off the lights because I had fallen asleep on the floor. Wouldn't it be great to have children and grandchildren that love you enough to be concerned with your needs? She must be doing something right. As Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 9, that whether we're away or at home, we make it our aim to please him. Why? Because we love him. We obey him because we fear him. We obey him because it's the right thing to do. But we also obey God because we love him. Jesus says this in John 14:31. I do as the Father has commanded me, so that the world may know that I love the Father. Jesus says in the next chapter, chapter 15, verse 10, if you keep my commandments, you are abiding in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments, and I am abiding in his love. A child who will not obey his parents does not love his parents. He can say all day long, I love my mom and dad, but if he does not obey, he does not love. And a child of God who does not obey God does not love his Father either. Why else do we teach our kids to obey? Because of welfare. No, I'm not talking about government welfare. I'm talking about their welfare. Kids obey because they are convinced that their parents issue orders that are for their good. Now, sometimes we need to remind children of this because initially they're going to think this is not for my good. What would be good for me is if I could go over to Johnny's house anytime that I wanted, even though he's a bad influence on me. Or I could go to the dance wearing this skirt that's about 2 inches below my hips or something like that. But a child needs to have it reinforced that parents really are giving orders because they're concerned with their children's welfare. Their requirements and their restrictions are for our good. Listen to this from Deuteronomy chapter 10 while Moses is reviewing the law of God. It says, "Now Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I commanded you to this day for your good." You may have assessed that God's commandment is going to bring evil into your life. But we need to get the idea that God always commands things for our good. And when we teach our children how to obey, we're teaching them that the commands, the restrictions, and the regulations are for their benefit. And that things turn out better for them when they obey. When I was 5 years old, my babysitter for a brief time was Dawn Van Buren. And Dawn lived up near the train tracks, and I loved trains, and this was when the trains still used to run through Philmont, New York. And I can remember the first week that she was babysitting us, she said she knew that I liked trains, so she got me, 6 years old, and my younger brother, 4 years old, and she stood us down at the end of the driveway because she knew that the train was going to be coming around 3:30. And we could hear that train a-coming. No, I'm not Johnny Cash. And it was getting louder and louder. And it was so loud, you thought, I ought to be able to see this train. And Dawn knew that the best place to view the train was at the end of her driveway. And she says, you guys stay here and you'll be able to see the train. Well, I got a little anxious and started running down the street toward the sound of the train. But what I didn't realize is the train was down behind a steep embankment. The closer I got to the embankment, the less of the train I was going to be able to see. And when I realized that the train had come and gone, it was too late. And I had not seen the train. But you can better believe that the next day, when the train came through at 3:30, I was standing there with her at the end of the driveway because I was convinced that what she had told me to do was in my best interest. And sometimes we need to remind our children of that after the fact. And we need to teach them that God always has our best interest in mind and that we can trust him and things go better for us when we listen. Another reason we teach our children to obey is because they are to be an example. Kids need to be an example to other kids, especially unbelievers. The family that God invented was designed to reflect the image and the likeness of God and the family of God, how Christians, true believers, relate to God, our Father. And when children obey their parents, they're showing the world a picture of how all Christians relate to God, our Father. So, we teach them the reasons for obedience. We teach them the rewards for obedience. Now, let me do a disclaimer up front. And occasionally I fall into this myself because I hear it so often, but I am trying to rid myself of this habit. When you tell your child to pick up his toys and he does it, don't thank him. He has not done you a favor. He has done himself a favor. If you ask your child to go into the other room and to get the cup of coffee that you left on the counter and bring it to you on the couch, thank him because he's done you a favor. But when you are giving him instructions, don't thank him. Does God thank us for obeying him like we're doing him some sort of favor? No. No, we're doing ourselves a favor. So we teach them the rewards for obedience. Ecclesiastes chapter 8, Solomon tells us, I know that it will be well with those who fear God, because they fear before him, but it will not be well with the wicked. In Isaiah chapter 3, tell the righteous that it will be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their deeds. Woe to the wicked! It shall be ill with him, for what his hands have done shall be done to him. Is obeying our parents important to God? Hey, you're church people. I know you're just going to nod your head. I want you to consider this passage when answering the question, is it important to God that children obey their parents? Deuteronomy chapter 21. If a man has a stubborn and a rebellious son, you may insert my name in there if you like, who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and though they whip him, will not listen to them, then his father and his mother shall take a hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the gate at the city of the place where he lives. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones, and so you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Is obeying your parents important to the Lord? What did that passage that I read in our scripture reading say that Elijah was going to do when he came on the scene before the great and terrible day of the Lord? He's going to turn the hearts of the children to their fathers and the hearts of the fathers to their children. That means there's going to be that God-desired relationship between children and their parents. Otherwise, a country falls apart. You know why these kids and adults, I don't think they're adults, are out there rioting and disrespecting authority and doing what they do to the police? It's because they were never taught by their parents this principle. Did you guys see about 3 or 4 years ago when some of these riots began? This woman discovered that her teenage son was out there in the midst of this, and on camera she just absolutely humiliates this kid, slapping him in the head. I've taught you better than this. It's a great video. It still circulates every now and then. At least somebody's doing something right. So in phase number 1, how do we fulfill this commandment? When we are children, we obey and we respect. Why do we respect? Because of their position. Who put them in the position as your parents? God. But my parents don't deserve respect. My mom's a drunk and my dad's in jail. You think, oh, forgot all about that. Okay, you're off the hook. God knew that when he appointed them as your parents. And God is preparing you for life. There are lots of kids that grew up with drunk moms and drunk dads. And in the family, you'll find that one person is an upstanding citizen and thanks God every day, and the other one still resents it and goes his own way. There's no excuse for it. God assigned our parents. He made them our authority, and God knew what they were like when he did that. Let me give you an amusing example of how this works out in my life. For those of you who know me, when natural disasters come, people die suddenly, I lose my job, or the car breaks down, or we've got this illness that it's affecting people and I might die, I don't get too bent out of shape over stuff like that. You know? And in boot camp, every day I got punched somewhere on my body. And they would exercise me to death and play mind games with me. And one time, the drill instructor even threw an M16 at my face. The blood was everywhere. Toward the end of boot camp, the drill instructor said, "Perfetto, why have we not been able to break you?" And I said, "Guys," I didn't say guys. I said, "Sir." And he didn't want to hear this. I says, "Compared to what my mother put me through, you guys are a piece of cake." No matter what your parents were like or what happened to you as a child, God is preparing you to be a certain kind of Christian with certain kinds of strengths and weaknesses. So in phase one, when we are children, we obey and we respect. Phase number two, how do we honor our parents? In phase number two, when we are adults. And let me start this conversation, first of all, by giving you my opinion. When I first became pastor, I told you that I was going to distinguish between "Thus saith the word of God" and my opinion. Well, this is my opinion. When are we adults? Is it when we get to be a certain age? Or I think it's when you don't depend upon your parents and you are taking responsibility for the choices that you make, and you are paying your way, and you are buying your groceries, and you are paying your rent, and you are paying your mortgage, and you are making your car payments, and not with the money that they give you, but with the money that you earn. And that's just my opinion about when you have become an adult. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't turn to mom and dad for help every now and then. That's not what I'm saying. So, but if this is not the case, if your parents still are providing for you or paying for your car and your college, then you better be obeying them too, especially if you live on their property. And if you want to be independent of their authority, then you better be worthy of it by paying your own way. Your obligation to obey your parents may disappear when you become an adult, but your obligation to treat your parents with respect does not disappear. Doesn't mean you can't oppose your parents. It does not mean that you can't disagree with your parents, but you do it respectfully. Phase number three. Phase number one, how do we honor our parents? When we are children, we obey and we respect. When we are adults, phase number two, we respect. You notice the obedience factor has disappeared. Phase number three is when our parents are old and feeble. Now, I don't know about the Hebrew word, but I do know that the Greek word honor also means to pay. It is the Greek word or verb timao. Paul says over in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse number 17, honor elders in the church that rule well, especially those who are in the process of teaching and preaching. What's he saying? He says they deserve double honor in that verse. That means you pay them more money if they're doing a good job of teaching and preaching. And I'm not saying this to get you guys to do that, okay? But that's a clear case when timao, or honor, means to pay. When a preacher does a funeral or a wedding, he receives what is called an honorarium. An honorarium. That's just a fee for doing, but it's paying. You're paying him. It's just a fancy word. So, listen to what Paul also says in 1 Timothy chapter 5. He says, honor widows who are true widows. Now, what makes a widow a true widow? He goes on. If a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn their religious duty to their own family and to make some return to their parents. I tried my hardest this past week to find the song that came out in the 60s that implied, no, it was more than implied, that children had no obligations whatsoever to their parents. But Paul says here that you must make return to your parents. If they get to be this age, you take care of them, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, especially for his own family, he has disowned the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I point out Randy Fincher as an example of this. It would have been easy for Randy Fincher to have placed his mother with some really bad memory problems into a home and not taken care of her. But he took care of her. And I know that that was difficult both for him and Lynn. And this is what he's talking about. When our parents are old, you make some return on the investment that they have made in you, and you take care of them. Jesus chewed out the scribes and Pharisees on this issue because they had taken some of the money that they should have been taking care of their parents with, and they designated it as a gift for God. And Jesus says, but you say, if anyone tells his father or mother, what you would have gained from me, I have given over to God, then you do not need to honor your father and your mother. You people are hypocrites. So, the command is very clear. Honor your father and your mother. And I've given you the reasons. What are the results? It says in the same verse, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. This is before Israel got to the land of Canaan, which means that a failure to honor your father and your mother must have been at least part of the contributing cause to get them expelled from the land, because they did not live long in the land that their God was giving them. So let's endeavor to rear our children in the discipline and admonition of the Lord, so that they are not ignorant of what it means to obey God, and so that they also will be a blessing to others. Father, ask that you would make us good examples of honoring our parents, showing the world that we have a God who is worthy of even greater honor. In Jesus' name.